Story number 1. Shadows of Yongdeok, the house on the hill. I never set out to explore the supernatural. I was a journalist with a penchant for offbeat stories, drawn more to quirky anecdotes than tales of terror. But when an assignment brought me to Yongdeok, South Korea, to investigate a crumbling house perched atop a desolate hill, I found myself descending into a nightmare that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The locals called it the house on the hill. It stood alone, shrouded in mystery and shadow, its decaying walls and overgrown surroundings a stark contrast to the picturesque seaside village below. Rumors swirled about its haunted nature, stories of inexplicable deaths, ghostly apparitions, and the screams of unseen women echoing through the night. Most avoided it entirely, crossing the street if they had to walk near its winding, weed-choked path. The few who dared to speak of it offered chilling warnings. Don't go in there. For the villagers, the house was more than a derelict building. It was a wound, festering with the dark history of its former occupants. But I wasn't from Yongdeok, and as an outsider, I couldn't resist the pull of the story. The house was said to have been built in the early 20th century by a wealthy family who met a tragic end. One stormy night, the patriarch went mad, slaughtering his wife and children before hanging himself from the grand staircase. Since then, the property had passed through several owners, each one claiming to encounter unexplainable phenomena, shadows that moved independently, whispers in empty rooms, and the oppressive feeling of being watched. By the 1970s, the house was abandoned, left to decay under the weight of its grim history. Yet, it remained a fixture of local folklore, the tales growing darker with each passing year. I arrived in Yongdeok on a cloudy afternoon, the kind where the sky hangs low and gray, pressing down on everything below. The air was heavy with the scent of salt and damp earth, and the wind carried whispers from the sea. My guide, a young man named Minjae, refused to accompany me up the hill. People who go there don't come back the same, he said, avoiding my gaze. If you hear someone call your name, don't answer. I laughed nervously, brushing off his warning as superstition. With my camera slung over my shoulder and a notebook in hand, I made the trek up the hill alone. The path was overgrown with thorny bushes and gnarled roots, as if the land itself was trying to keep intruders away. The house loomed ahead, its silhouette jagged and menacing against the darkening sky. Its windows were shattered, like hollow eyes staring down at me, and the front door hung crookedly on rusted hinges. The air grew colder as I approached, the wind carrying a faint, metallic scent that made my stomach churn. Stepping inside, the first thing I noticed was the silence. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of an empty house, but a suffocating stillness that seemed to swallow every sound. The air was thick, heavy with dust and the lingering odor of decay. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the floorboards creaked ominously under my weight. I began to explore, my camera clicking as I documented the derelict interior. The grand staircase, once the centerpiece of the house, was rotting and splintered, its balusters leaning at precarious angles. The living room was littered with debris, broken furniture, shattered glass, and what looked like old family photographs, their edges burned and faces scratched out. As I ventured further, I started to feel it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. My skin prickled, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder every few seconds, expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing, only the faint echo of my own footsteps and the relentless silence. The first truly unsettling event happened in what appeared to be a child's bedroom. The room was small, its walls adorned with faded, pastel wallpaper depicting rabbits and clouds. A lone rocking chair sat in the corner, its wood warped and cracked. As I stepped inside, the air grew colder, my breath visible in the dim light filtering through the broken window. I snapped a few photos, focusing on the chair. That's when it moved. Slowly, deliberately, it began to rock back and forth, the creaking sound cutting through the silence like a scream. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. My rational mind fought to explain it, perhaps the wind. A trick of gravity, but there was no breeze. And the chair had been perfectly still moments before. A soft whisper broke the silence. So faint I almost thought I imagined it. Came again. Clearer this time. A childlike voice calling my name. Chris. My blood turned to ice. Minjae's warning echoed in my mind. If you hear someone call your name, don't answer. I stumbled backward, my camera slipping from my grasp and clattering to the floor. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, as if whatever was calling me was getting closer. Chris, come play. I bolted from the room, my pulse racing, and nearly tripped over a broken chair in the hallway. I forced myself to take deep breaths, convincing myself it was all in my head. But as I reached the grand staircase, I heard something that shattered any semblance of composure. Laughter, high-pitched and echoing. It reverberated through the house, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was the sound of children, but there was something off about it, something cold and hollow, like the laugh track of a long-forgotten nightmare. The house wasn't just haunted. It was alive. The walls seemed to breathe, the shadows shifting and writhing as if they had minds of their own. Doors slammed shut of their own accord, and a low, guttural growl emanated from the depths of the basement, vibrating through the floorboards. I knew I should leave, but a morbid curiosity compelled me to stay. I descended the staircase cautiously, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The growling grew louder as I neared the basement door, which was slightly ajar. My hand trembled as I pushed it open, revealing a steep, narrow staircase leading down into pitch blackness. At the bottom of the stairs was a cavernous room, its walls lined with shelves cluttered with rusted tools and rotting wood. In the center of the room stood a table, its surface stained dark with what I could only hope was water. The metallic scent was overwhelming now, and the growling had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Then I saw it, a figure standing at the far end of the room. It was tall and gaunt, its face obscured by a mass of matted hair. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, and its head tilted unnaturally, as if studying me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as it raised a hand and pointed directly at me. The next thing I remember is running, my feet pounding against the floor as I fled the house. The path down the hill seemed endless, the shadows stretching and twisting around me. I didn't stop until I reached the village, collapsing in front of a bewildered Minjae. I never returned to the house on the hill. The photographs I took that day were inexplicably blurred, the images distorted as if the house itself refused to be captured. For weeks, I had nightmares, visions of the figure in the basement and the whispers that called my name. The locals say the house still stands, its windows dark and unyielding, watching over the village like a silent predator. No one knows what truly haunts its halls, but those who dare to enter rarely leave unscathed. Some places aren't meant to be explored. The house on the hill is one of them, and as I write this, the faint sound of laughter lingers in my ears, a chilling reminder of the horrors that wait in the shadows. Story number 2. Shadows of Harrisville. I've always loved old houses. There's something about their creaking floorboards and peeling wallpaper that speaks to me, as if the walls themselves have stories to tell. When my husband, Tom, and I stumbled upon the colonial farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island, felt like fate, nestled on 14 acres of rolling countryside. The house was everything we'd ever dreamed of, a peaceful retreat from the chaos of city life. The house was a steal, and we were eager to start a new chapter with our 3 daughters. The real estate agent had been upfront about the property's history. It dated back to the 18th century and had passed through many hands. There were rumors, of course, whispers of hauntings and tragedies, but we dismissed them as small-town gossip. Our first few days in the house were blissful. The girls loved exploring the sprawling property, and I found joy in uncovering the little quirks of the old house. The hidden pantry in the kitchen, the ornate molding around the fireplace, and the massive oak tree in the backyard that seemed to stand sentinel over the land. But the honeymoon period didn't last long. It started with small things, doors that refused to stay shut, the faint sound of footsteps in empty rooms, and cold spots that appeared despite the summer heat. At first, we laughed it off. Old house quirks, Tom would say, shrugging as another door creaked open on its own. But as the days turned into weeks, the incidents became harder to ignore. One night, while putting our youngest daughter, Emily, to bed, she asked me a question that sent chills down my spine. "Mommy, who's the lady that stands in my doorway at night?" I froze, forcing a smile. "What lady, sweetheart?" "The one with the gray dress," she said matter-of-factly. "She watches me, but she doesn't say anything." I brushed it off as a child's imagination. But that night, I slept with the door to Emily's room wide open. I told myself it was just a phase, a figment of her young mind adjusting to the unfamiliar surroundings. But deep down, I felt the first seeds of unease take root. The activity escalated over the following weeks. The girls began complaining of strange occurrences, toys moving on their own, whispers that seemed to come from the walls, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. I tried to stay rational, but it was becoming harder to dismiss the mounting evidence. Then, one evening, something happened that shattered any lingering doubts. It was late, and the house was quiet. Tom was asleep, and I was downstairs finishing some work at the kitchen table. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement, a shadow flitting across the room. I turned, expecting to see one of the girls, but the room was empty. As I stood, the temperature plummeted, and the unmistakable scent of decaying flowers filled the air. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very walls. My heart pounded as I backed away, the sound growing louder, more menacing. The overhead light flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I stumbled toward the stairs, my breath hitching in my throat. Just as I reached the landing, I saw it, a figure standing at the far end of the hallway, its form shrouded in shadows. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its presence radiated malevolence. I didn't sleep that night, desperate for answers. I began researching the history of the house. What I uncovered was chilling. The farmhouse had a dark past, rife with death and despair. The original owner, a woman named Bathsheba Sherman, had been accused of witchcraft and allegedly sacrificed her infant child to the devil. Though she was never convicted, she remained a pariah until her death. Subsequent owners reported strange occurrences, and many families left the house under mysterious circumstances. Fearing for my family's safety, I reached out to paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, renowned for their work in the field of the supernatural. They arrived a week later, their presence both comforting and unsettling. Lorraine, a clairvoyant, immediately sensed the dark energy that permeated the house. "There's something here," she said, her voice heavy with certainty. "It's not just one spirit, it's many, but one stands out above the rest. She's angry, vengeful, and she doesn't want you here." The Warrens conducted a séance that night, hoping to communicate with the spirits and uncover the source of the disturbances. What followed was the most terrifying experience of my life. The séance began calmly, the room illuminated by the soft glow of candles. Lorraine held my hand, her eyes closed as she murmured a prayer. But as the session progressed, the atmosphere in the room changed. The air grew heavy, the temperature dropping to an icy chill. The candles flickered violently, their flames bending unnaturally. Suddenly, Lorraine's eyes flew open, her face contorted in fear. "She's here," she whispered. A deafening crash echoed through the room as the table lifted off the ground and slammed back down. The walls seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and a foul stench filled the air. Then, without warning, Tom was thrown backward, his chair toppling as an invisible force dragged him across the floor. The Warrens shouted prayers, their voices steady despite the chaos. The entity retaliated, manifesting as a dark, twisted figure that loomed over us. His face was a grotesque mask of rage, its eyes burning with an unnatural light. It let out an ear-piercing shriek that reverberated through the room, shaking the very foundation of the house. I clung to my daughters, shielding them as best I could. The Warrens continued their exorcism, their prayers a beacon of light in the darkness. Slowly, the entity began to weaken, its form flickering and dissipating like smoke in the wind. Finally, with a final, guttural roar, it vanished, leaving behind an eerie silence. The Warrens stayed with us for several days, helping us cleanse the house and offering guidance on how to protect ourselves. Though the activity lessened, the house never truly felt like home again. We moved out shortly after, leaving behind the dreams we had once attached to that old farmhouse. To this day, I can't drive past Harrisville without feeling a chill run down my spine. The house still stands, a silent sentinel to the horrors that unfolded within its walls. The new owners claim they've experienced no disturbances. But I know better. The darkness may be dormant, but it's still there, waiting. The experience taught me that some places carry the weight of their history, their walls soaked in the memories of pain and suffering. The Harrisville farmhouse was one such place, a nexus of sorrow and malevolence that defied explanation. I no longer dismiss stories of the supernatural. I've seen the darkness, felt its breath on my neck, and survived its wrath. And while I've moved on, a part of me will always remain in that house, a fragment of my soul forever tethered to the shadows of Harrisville. Story number 3. Shadows beneath the funeral home. I never considered myself a superstitious person. Ghosts, hauntings, and things that go bump in the night belong to campfire tales and late-night horror movies. But when my family moved into the old house on a quiet street in Connecticut, everything I thought I knew about the world, about reality, was turned on its head. We were desperate at the time. My husband, Greg, had just lost his job, and our oldest son, Ethan, had been diagnosed with a rare form of cancer that required expensive treatments. When we stumbled upon the large Victorian house available for rent at a price we could afford, it felt like a blessing. Sure, it was old and needed some work, but it was spacious and had a warmth about it, despite its slightly dilapidated state. The landlord had been upfront about the house's history. It had once been a funeral home. The basement, now a laundry room and storage space, had been used for embalming. He said it as casually as if mentioning it had once been a bakery. That was years ago, he assured us with a dismissive wave of his hand. The place has good bones, though. We moved in the following week, blissfully unaware that our lives were about to unravel. The first sign that something was wrong came within days. Ethan, who had always been a light sleeper, began waking up screaming in the middle of the night. He'd say that a man stood at the foot of his bed, whispering things he couldn't understand. First, Greg and I chalked it up to nightmares. Ethan was under a lot of stress with his treatments. But then the others started noticing things, too. Our youngest, Lily, refused to go near the basement. She said she didn't like the cold people down there. When I pressed her for details, she simply said, "They stare too much." Greg, a lifelong skeptic, started hearing faint voices when he was alone in the house. First, he dismissed them as his imagination. But one night, while working late in the dining room, he swore he saw a shadow move across the hallway, even though everyone else was asleep. And then there was me. I started finding things out of place. Doors left open that I knew I'd closed, furniture subtly shifted, and strange smells, something metallic and decaying, that seemed to come and go without explanation. But the most unsettling experience happened 2 weeks after we moved in. It was late at night, and I was doing laundry in the basement. The room was dimly lit by a single bare bulb, and the air was damp and heavy. As I folded clothes, I felt it, a presence. It wasn't just the sensation of being watched. It was oppressive, as if the air itself were pressing down on me. I turned around, expecting to see Greg or one of the kids, but the room was empty. That's when I noticed it. On the far wall, where the old embalming table once stood. A dark stain began to spread across the concrete floor. It was thick and viscous, like oil, but it smelled of rot and decay. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. And then, as I stared, the stain began to move, stretching out tendrils toward me like fingers. I dropped the laundry basket and bolted upstairs, slamming the basement door behind me. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew better. Over the following weeks, the activity in the house escalated. Doors slammed shut on their own, objects flew off shelves, and cold spots moved through the rooms like invisible specters. The smell of decay became more frequent, lingering in the air no matter how much I cleaned. One night, Ethan came into our bedroom, his face pale and tear-streaked. "He's back," he whispered, clutching his blanket. "The man in my room." Greg went to investigate but found nothing. Still, Ethan insisted the man had been there, standing in the corner with hollow eyes and a mouth that stretched far too wide. "He told me to leave," Ethan said, trembling. "He said we're not supposed to be here." Desperate for answers, I started researching the house's history. What I discovered left me cold. The funeral home had been run by a man named Walter Grayson, who had been accused of conducting illegal experiments on the bodies brought to him. Though he was never formally charged, rumors persisted that he used the corpses for occult rituals, hoping to unlock the secrets of life and death. The business shut down abruptly after Grayson's mysterious disappearance, and the house had remained vacant for years until it was converted into a rental property. It all started to make sense: the voices, the shadows, the oppressive presence. The house wasn't just haunted. It was a portal for something darker, something that had been awakened by Grayson's twisted practices. The final straw came on a stormy night in November. The power had gone out, and the house was plunged into darkness. We gathered in the living room with flashlights and candles, trying to make the best of it. But the atmosphere was heavy, the air charged with static. Lily suddenly screamed, pointing toward the hallway. "They're here," she cried, burying her face in my lap. Greg shone his flashlight toward the hall, and we all saw it: shadows, impossibly tall and humanoid, moving toward us. Their forms shifted and flickered as if they were made of smoke, and their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. The room grew freezing cold, and the candles flickered violently before going out. The shadows closed in, their movements deliberate and predatory. I grabbed the kids, screaming at Greg to follow, and we bolted out the front door into the pouring rain. We spent the night in a motel, too terrified to return. The next morning, I called a priest to bless the house. He arrived with holy water and a Bible, his demeanor calm but serious. As he began the blessing, the house seemed to resist. The walls creaked, the temperature plummeted, and a guttural voice echoed through the empty halls. "Get out!" The priest's face turned ashen, but he finished the blessing, insisting we leave immediately. "This place is cursed," he said, his voice trembling. "It's not safe for your family." We moved out the next day, leaving behind most of our belongings. The landlord was sympathetic but offered no explanations. "You're not the first family to leave," he admitted, "and you won't be the last." To this day, I can't drive past that house without feeling a knot of fear in my stomach. It still stands, its windows dark and empty, a silent sentinel to the horrors within. I've often wondered if the spirits were the restless dead, victims of Grayson's experiments, or something far older and darker. Whatever the truth, the house taught me one thing: some places are not meant to be disturbed. They hold onto their secrets with a vengeance, lashing out at anyone who dares to trespass. And sometimes, it's best to leave the past where it belongs, in the shadows, hidden and forgotten. Story number 4. Echoes of the Winchester. I've always been fascinated by the macabre and the unexplained. As an architectural historian, my passion lies in uncovering the stories behind the most peculiar buildings. those that defy logic and reason. So when I first heard about the Winchester House, my curiosity was instantly piqued. Nestled in San Jose, California, this sprawling Victorian mansion was not just an architectural marvel, but also a repository of dark legends and eerie tales. Determined to uncover the truth, I embarked on a journey that would blur the lines between reality and nightmare. The Winchester House, built by Sarah Winchester, widow of the firearm magnate William Wirt Winchester, is renowned for its labyrinthine design. Over 38 years, Sarah continuously expanded the house, following the advice of a medium she believed was guiding her to appease the restless spirits of those killed by Winchester rifles. The result was a maze of rooms, staircases leading to nowhere, doors opening into walls, and windows overlooking other rooms. Locals whispered about the house's haunted reputation, recounting stories of ghostly apparitions and inexplicable phenomena. Intrigued by these tales, I decided to spend a night in the mansion, documenting my experiences for a comprehensive study on haunted architecture. I arrived at dusk, the setting sun casting long shadows over the ornate facade of the house. The intricate woodwork and stained glass windows gleamed eerily in the fading light, their beauty marred by an unsettling aura. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and something else, something metallic and foreboding. As I stepped through the grand entrance, the heavy wooden doors creaked open, revealing a vast foyer adorned with elaborate chandeliers and antique furniture covered in white sheets. Armed with my camera, notebook, and a voice recorder, I began my exploration. The house was a testament to Sarah Winchester's obsessive quest to build a sanctuary for the spirits. Each room was more bizarre than the last, with impossible angles and spaces that defied architectural conventions. Staircases spiraled upwards into darkness, doors swung open into solid walls, and mirrors reflected rooms that didn't exist. As night fell, the house seemed to awaken. The temperature dropped noticeably, and an oppressive silence settled over the mansion. I set up my equipment in what appeared to be a grand library, its shelves lined with dusty tomes and forgotten relics. The only source of light was a flickering lamp on a heavy wooden desk, casting dancing shadows across the room. Hours passed uneventfully until midnight when I began to feel an inexplicable sense of unease. The air grew colder, and the faint sound of footsteps echoed through the halls. I dismissed it as the house settling, a common occurrence in such an old structure. But the sounds persisted, growing louder and more deliberate. It was as if someone or something was moving through the house, tracing invisible paths along the walls. I decided to investigate, following the sound to a narrow corridor adorned with portraits of stern-faced individuals whose eyes seemed to follow my every move. The footsteps led me to a room at the end of the hall, a study with bookshelves that reached the ceiling and a large, imposing desk cluttered with papers. As I entered, the door slammed shut behind me, plunging the room into darkness. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light that danced across the walls. Panic surged through me as I fumbled to turn on my camera's night vision. Through the lens, I saw a shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room, its form indistinct yet undeniably human. My heart raced as I tried to steady my breathing. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure remained motionless, its presence oppressive and malevolent. Suddenly, the air grew icy, and the room seemed to contract. The walls closing in around me, the figure began to move, gliding towards me with an unnatural grace. I backed away, tripping over a stack of papers and falling to the floor. As the figure approached, I could make out features, pallid skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones, hollow eyes that seemed to pierce my soul, and a mouth twisted into a silent scream. Desperate to escape, I scrambled to my feet and bolted towards the door. But it wouldn't budge. The room felt suffocating, the weight of unseen forces pressing down on me. I remembered the stories of Sarah Winchester's restless spirits, their anguish and anger fueled by decades of unfinished business. The figure reached out, his hands cold and clammy, fingers elongating into sharp talons that scraped against my skin. With a surge of adrenaline, I tore myself away, breaking through the invisible barrier that held the door closed. I sprinted down the corridor, the sounds of chaos following me, books crashing to the floor, windows shattering, and the persistent whispers growing louder. More frantic, the house seemed to shift and change, rooms morphing into different spaces, corridors looping back on themselves in impossible configurations. In a final desperate attempt, I found myself in the foyer once more, the grand chandelier above swinging wildly, casting grotesque shadows that danced like phantoms in the night. The oppressive atmosphere reached its peak, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Just as I was about to collapse from exhaustion and fear, the doors of the house burst open, and the first light of dawn streamed in, dispelling the darkness and lifting the heavy aura that had consumed the mansion. Breathing heavily, I stepped outside, the morning sun warming my face and melting the remnants of fear that clung to me. The house stood silent and still, its dark secrets momentarily quelled by the light of day. As I looked back, I couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits were still watching, their presence lingering like a shadow in the early morning light. In the weeks that followed, I compiled my notes and recordings, piecing together the terrifying events of that night. The footage from my camera captured fleeting glimpses of the ghostly apparitions, their silent pleas echoing through the halls of the Winchester house. The voice recorder picked up the disembodied whispers, a haunting reminder of the restless spirits that inhabited the mansion. The Winchester house remains a subject of fascination and fear, a place where architecture and the supernatural intertwine to create an atmosphere of perpetual horror. My experience there taught me that some buildings hold onto their past with an unrelenting grip, their stories etched into every corner and crevice. The spirits of those lost to the house's tragic history continue to roam its halls, their anguish and sorrow manifesting in the very fabric of the structure. As an architectural historian, I've encountered many strange and unusual buildings, but none have left as lasting an impression as the Winchester House. It stands as a testament to the power of belief, the lengths one woman would go to appease the spirits that haunted her, and the enduring legacy of tragedy and sorrow. The house is a physical manifestation of Sarah Winchester's grief and her desperate attempt to find peace for herself and the restless souls she believed were at war with her. To this day, I sometimes find myself glancing over my shoulder when passing the Winchester house, the memory of that night vivid in my mind, the feeling of being watched, the oppressive darkness, and the chilling presence of the spirits are memories that refuse to fade. I've learned to respect the power of places like the Winchester house, understanding that beneath their architectural beauty lies a world of pain and unresolved anguish. In the quiet moments, when the wind whispers through the trees and the shadows dance in the corners of my vision, I'm reminded of the fragile line between the living and the dead. The Winchester house remains a haunting reminder that some stories never truly end, their echoes lingering in the spaces we inhabit. And as I continue my work, documenting the most peculiar and haunted buildings, I carry with me the lessons learned from the Winchester house, a place where architecture and the supernatural collide, creating a symphony of shadows that plays on in the darkest of nights. Story number 5. Echoes of Inanaki. I've always been intrigued by the stories that linger in the shadows, the whispered legends that refuse to fade despite the passage of time. When I first heard about Inanaki Village in Japan, my curiosity was piqued. Nestled deep within the mountains, Inanaki was infamous for its eerie tales and the abandoned tunnel that snaked ominously into the heart of the village. Locals spoke of strange phenomena, unexplained disappearances, and an atmosphere so oppressive that even the bravest souls hesitated to venture near after dusk. As a freelance journalist with a penchant for the supernatural, I knew Inanaki was the perfect subject for my next investigation. The village's reputation as a place that didn't adhere to the conventional norms of Japanese society only added to its mystique. Stories of abandoned houses with shattered windows, streets perpetually cloaked in darkness, and an unshakable feeling of being watched were common. Determined to uncover the truth, I booked a trip to the outskirts of Tokyo, where the journey to Inanaki would begin. The bus ride was long and winding, traversing narrow mountain roads blanketed in dense fog. The further I got from the city, the more isolated I felt. Trees loomed overhead, their branches like skeletal hands reaching out to the sky. As dusk settled, the landscape transformed into a monochromatic world of grays and blacks, the fading light casting elongated shadows that danced menacingly across the road. When the bus finally pulled up to the edge of Inanaki village, the sight that greeted me was both haunting and mesmerizing. The village was a collection of dilapidated houses, their once vibrant colors now faded and peeling. Windows were shattered, doors creaked on their hinges, and an unearthly silence hung heavy in the air. The streets were eerily empty, the only movement coming from the occasional stray cat darting between the shadows. I checked into a small, run-down inn on the outskirts of the village. The proprietor, an elderly man with sunken eyes and a stooped posture, gave me a curt nod as I entered. "You must be the journalist," he said in a gravelly voice. "Room 3. It's the only one left." "Thank you," I replied, trying to hide my unease. As I settled into my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The room was sparsely furnished, with a single bed, a wooden desk, and a flickering lamp that cast eerie shadows on the walls. I unpacked my gear, preparing for the night ahead. My primary focus was the abandoned tunnel, a place shrouded in mystery and fear. The following morning, armed with a notebook, camera, and flashlight, I set out to explore the village. The streets were desolate, the air thick with the scent of dampness and decay. Every step I took seemed to echo through the empty houses, amplifying the silence that enveloped the village. As I wandered, I documented the signs of abandonment, broken furniture, graffiti scrawled on walls, and remnants of lives abruptly halted. After hours of exploring, I made my way to the entrance of the infamous tunnel. It was a narrow passageway, partially obscured by overgrown vegetation and debris. The mouth of the tunnel seemed to swallow the light, an abyss that beckoned me to uncover its secrets. Taking a deep breath, I switched on my flashlight and stepped inside. The tunnel was claustrophobic, the walls closing in around me as I ventured deeper into the darkness. The air grew colder, and an unsettling silence prevailed, broken only by the distant drip of water echoing through the passage. My heart pounded in my chest, each step feeling heavier than the last. The further I went, the more the tunnel seemed to distort, twisting reality into something unrecognizable. Suddenly, I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible over the sound of my footsteps. "Leave now." I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The voice was ethereal, haunting, and undeniably human. I tried to rationalize it, convincing myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But as I pressed forward, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Leave now." Panic surged through me, urging me to turn back. But something compelled me to continue, a morbid curiosity driving me deeper into the tunnel's depths. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsating with an unnatural rhythm that matched the frantic beating of my heart. Shadows danced at the periphery of my vision, fleeting glimpses of figures that vanished when I tried to look directly at them. As I reached the end of the tunnel, a blinding light engulfed me, momentarily disorienting my senses. When my vision cleared, I found myself in a small chamber, the air thick with an oppressive energy. The room was circular, the walls adorned with strange symbols and faded photographs depicting families and children, victims of the tunnel's dark history. In the center of the room stood a figure, draped in tattered robes, its face obscured by darkness. The whispers returned, now accompanied by the sound of scraping, like chairs being dragged across the floor. The figure began to move towards me, each step deliberate and menacing. "Why are you here?" the voice echoed, its tone a mix of sorrow and rage. "Why do you disturb our peace?" I stumbled back, my mind racing to find a way out. I am sorry. I didn't mean to. But the figure advanced, the symbols on the walls glowing faintly as if reacting to its presence. You must leave, it commanded, its voice growing louder, more urgent. Return to the world above and warn others of the darkness that dwells within. Terrified, I turned and fled the chamber, racing back through the tunnel with the oppressive weight of the spirits pressing down on me. The whispers intensified, their pleas for peace blending with the sounds of the tunnel's sinister ambience. Every step felt like a battle against an invisible force, pushing me towards the exit. Finally, I emerged from the tunnel, gasping for breath, the morning sun piercing through the gloom that had enveloped the village. The air felt lighter, the oppressive energy lifted, but the memory of what I had encountered lingered, etched into my very soul. Determined to share my experience, I returned to the inn to gather my thoughts and prepare my report. The proprietor eyed me with a knowing look, a silent acknowledgement of the horrors that lay beneath Inanaki. You saw it too, he said quietly, his voice tinged with sadness. Many have tried to uncover the truth, but few survive the encounter. I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. What happened here? Why does this place hold so much darkness? He sighed, motioning for me to sit. In 1974, a tragic fire consumed 7 lives in this very house. The spirits of those lost have been restless ever since, unable to find peace. The tunnel serves as a conduit between our world and theirs, a place where their anguish manifests into the physical realm. They seek recognition, understanding, and ultimately, closure. As I listened, a chill ran down my spine. The realization that the village was a nexus of sorrow and unresolved pain deepened my understanding of the phenomena I had witnessed. The abandoned houses, the perpetual darkness, and the haunted tunnel, all were manifestations of the lingering spirits trapped in their endless torment. Determined to honor their memory and help them find peace, I decided to document their stories, bringing their voices to light in hopes of offering them the closure they desperately sought. I spent the following weeks interviewing locals, gathering accounts of encounters, and piecing together the fragmented history of Inanaki Village. One night, as I sat in the inn's common area, I felt a presence nearby. The air grew thick with emotion, and the temperature plummeted. I looked up to see the figure from the tunnel standing at the entrance of the room, its form wavering between the physical and the ethereal. "Thank you," the voice whispered, softer now, filled with gratitude. "You have listened, and you have remembered. May we finally find peace." With those final words, the figure faded, the room filling with a serene silence. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a comforting warmth that enveloped me like a gentle embrace. I knew then that my efforts had not been in vain, that I had played a part in bridging the gap between the living and the dead. In the months that followed, Inanaki Village began to change. The once bleak and haunted atmosphere gave way to a sense of calm and renewal. The abandoned houses were restored, the streets became vibrant once more, and the tunnel's dark legacy was transformed into a place of remembrance and respect. My story of Inanaki became a beacon for those seeking understanding and healing, a testament to the power of empathy and the enduring spirit of those who had been lost. I continued my work as a journalist, but my journey through Inanaki left an indelible mark on me, shaping my perspective on life, death, and the mysteries that lie beyond. Years later, I still visit Inanaki, now a peaceful village that honors its past while embracing the future. The echoes of the past linger in the gentle rustle of leaves and the soft whispers carried by the wind. A constant reminder of the night I faced the shadows and emerged with a story that transcended the boundaries of the mortal realm. In the quiet moments, when the moon casts its silvery glow over the mountains and the night air is filled with the scent of blooming flowers, I feel a connection to the spirits of Inanaki, their presence a comforting reminder that even in death, love and remembrance can bring light to the darkest of places. Story number 6. Shadows of Saigon. I've always been fascinated by the stories that cities whisper after dark. The legends that cling to abandoned buildings like cobwebs to forgotten corners. So when I first heard about the haunted house in Saigon, a place shrouded in tragedy and eerie tales, I knew I had to see it for myself. As a freelance journalist specializing in urban legends, this was the kind of story that could define my career. Little did I know, it would haunt me long after I left its crumbling facade. The house stood at the end of a narrow, overgrown alley in District 1. Its once vibrant facade now a ghostly white, peeling paint and shattered windows staring blankly into the night. Locals avoided the area after sunset, their hushed voices dropping whenever the topic arose. The tragic fire that consumed the house in 1998 had left 7 lives extinguished in an instant. And since then, the house had become a magnet for restless spirits and unexplained phenomena. Armed with my camera, notebook, and a healthy dose of skepticism, I decided to spend a night in the house to uncover the truth behind the legends. As I approached the property, the air grew noticeably colder, and an unsettling silence enveloped the area. The gate creaked ominously as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty street. Stepping inside, the house exuded an oppressive atmosphere. The grand foyer, once a symbol of wealth and hospitality, was now a decaying relic of its former glory. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight, and the scent of charred wood lingered in the air, a constant reminder of the night the flames claimed everything. I set up my equipment in what had once been the living room, the centerpiece of which was a grand chandelier now reduced to twisted metal and shattered glass. As midnight approached, I began to feel the weight of the house's dark history pressing down on me. I decided to start my investigation by documenting the room, noting every detail: the scorched walls, the remnants of furniture, and the pervasive sense of loss that seemed to seep from the very walls. Hours passed uneventfully until I heard it, a faint, rhythmic sound, like the swish of a broom across hardwood floors. My heart skipped a beat as I strained to listen. The sound seemed to emanate from the hallway, a ghostly echo of mundane activity. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the noise, each step amplifying the tension that coiled within me. As I walked down the corridor, the temperature dropped further, my breath visible in the frigid air. The swishing sound grew louder, more deliberate, as if someone or something was methodically sweeping the floor. I approached one of the bedrooms, the door slightly ajar, and peered inside. The room was untouched by time, the bed neatly made and personal items scattered casually. But there, in the corner, stood a figure, a translucent white shadow that moved with an unnatural grace, the broom gliding smoothly across the floor as if driven by an unseen hand. My pulse raced as I snapped photos, the flash briefly illuminating the specter before it dissolved into thin air. I turned to leave, but the hallway seemed to stretch infinitely, the house twisting and warping around me. The swishing sound turned into disembodied whispers, voices pleading and warning, their words indecipherable yet filled with anguish. Panic surged through me as I realized I was no longer in control, the house itself manipulating my perception, trapping me in a labyrinth of fear. Desperate to escape, I retraced my steps, but the house resisted, doors that once led to familiar rooms now opening to endless voids. The whispers intensified, the voices growing louder and more desperate. "Help us, remember us," they echoed, a haunting chorus that resonated deep within my soul. In a last-ditch effort to regain control, I focused on my purpose, uncovering the truth behind the house's haunting. I began to document everything, my voice recorder capturing every whisper and every shadow that flickered at the edge of my vision. As I delved deeper, I uncovered the tragic stories of the victims, families torn apart by the flames, lives cut short in an instant, their dreams and sorrows forever entwined with the house's dark legacy. Suddenly, the room erupted into chaos. The chandelier above me descended slowly, crashing to the floor with a deafening crash that shattered the fragile silence. The ground beneath me trembled, and the walls seemed to close in, the house groaning under the weight of its own sorrow. I stumbled back, clutching my camera as the white shadows swirled around me, their presence suffocating and malevolent. Just as I felt my strength waning, a blinding light pierced through the darkness, forcing me to shield my eyes. The oppressive atmosphere lifted momentarily, giving me a brief respite. In that fleeting moment of clarity, I saw a vision of the night the fire had consumed the house, flames dancing through the windows, the screams of the victims echoing through the corridors, and the desperate attempts to escape a fate sealed by fire. With renewed determination, I pushed forward, navigating the distorted hallways with a sense of purpose. The whispers faded, replaced by the roaring of the storm outside, a fitting soundtrack to the turmoil within. I finally found my way back to the living room, the house's dark energy dissipating as dawn broke, the first light of day casting away the shadows of the night. Exhausted but triumphant, I packed my equipment and made my way out of the house, the morning sun warming my face and dispelling the lingering fear. As I looked back, the house stood silent and still, its dark secrets momentarily quelled by the light of day. In the weeks that followed, my documentation of the night's events garnered attention, the photos and recordings serving as chilling evidence of the house's haunted legacy. I shared my findings with locals and paranormal experts, the story of the Amityville house in Saigon resonating with those who had felt its eerie presence. But the experience left an indelible mark on me, a haunting reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. The whispers and shadows lingered in my mind, a constant echo of the night I faced the house's dark history and emerged with a story that would forever bind me to the shadows of Saigon. Years have passed since that fateful night, and while the house remains abandoned, the legends continue to grow, fueled by the stories of those who dare to venture near. I often find myself glancing over my shoulder when driving past the derelict property, the memory of the night's horrors a ghostly presence that refuses to fade. In the quiet moments of reflection, I realize that some places hold onto their past with an unrelenting grip, their stories etched into the very fabric of their existence. The Amityville house in Saigon stands as a testament to the enduring power of tragedy and the restless spirits that seek closure beyond the veil of the living world. And so, I continue my journey as a storyteller, forever changed by the shadows that danced in the halls of the haunted house. The line between reality and the supernatural remains blurred, a reminder that the stories we tell are not just echoes of the past, but living entities that can reach out and touch our very souls. In the end, the Amityville house remains a beacon for those seeking the truth behind the legends, a place where the spirits of the lost still roam, forever seeking the peace that eluded them in their final moments. And as I share their stories, I honor their memories, ensuring that their whispers are heard and their shadows remembered, a permanent imprint on the haunted landscape of Saigon. Story number 7. Shadows of Amityville. I've always been drawn to the macabre, the unexplained, and the shadows that lurk just beyond the edge of reality. So when the opportunity arose to purchase the infamous Amityville house, couldn't resist. The stories surrounding the property were chilling. Tales of Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s brutal massacre of his family in 1974 and the subsequent harrowing experiences of the Lutz family, who fled after just 28 days. For me, it was the ultimate canvas to explore the depths of fear and the supernatural. The day I moved in was gray and overcast, the sky heavy with impending rain. The house stood imposingly at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in Amityville, its once vibrant facade now faded and weathered by time. The neighborhood was picturesque, with manicured lawns and friendly neighbors. But there was an undeniable tension in the air, a collective memory of the horrors that had unfolded within these walls. From the moment I stepped inside, I felt a palpable sense of unease. The air was thick with a musty scent, and the house seemed to groan under its own weight. The living room, the scene of so much bloodshed, felt colder than the rest of the house. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight filtering through the heavy curtains, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. I spent the first few days unpacking and settling in, trying to push aside the unsettling feelings that clung to me. But as night fell, the house awakened in ways I couldn't explain. It began subtly, whispers echoing through the halls, footsteps pacing in empty rooms, and fleeting glimpses of figures standing in the corners of my vision. I chalked it up to my imagination, the stress of moving, and the house's tragic history seeping into my subconscious. One evening, as I sat in the dimly lit kitchen, I decided to have a light-hearted chat with myself, trying to dispel the mounting tension. The room was silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. I reached for a glass of water, but my hand froze mid-air. There, on the countertop, was a thick, greenish substance, glue-like and sticky, spreading across the surface in grotesque patterns. My heart raced as I stared in disbelief. The same eerie substance that the Lutz family had reported dripping from the walls was now right in front of me. Panic surged through me. I backed away, knocking over the glass, splattering water everywhere. The room seemed to close in, the air growing heavy with a suffocating presence. I grabbed my phone, desperate to call someone, but the screen was dead. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible, determined to uncover the truth. I began researching the house's dark past. The more I delved into the history, the more the lines between fact and fiction blurred. Accounts of the Lutz family's terrifying experiences echoed my own. Foul odors permeating the air, objects moving on their own, and disembodied voices pleading for help. The stories spoke of malevolent spirits trapped within the house, their anguish and anger manifesting in terrifying ways. One night, as a fierce storm raged outside, the house seemed to awaken fully. Lightning illuminated the living room, revealing the grotesque patterns of the green substance spreading across the walls and ceiling. The temperature plummeted, my breath visible in the frigid air. I felt an invisible force pressing down on me, making it difficult to move. Suddenly, a voice pierced the silence, cold and commanding. Leave now," it echoed through the house, reverberating off the walls and chilling me to the bone. I spun around, searching for the source, but there was nothing, no one in sight. Terrified, I ran to my bedroom, barricading the door with whatever I could find. The whispers intensified, morphing into agonized cries and desperate pleas. Shadows danced menacingly on the walls, contorting into grotesque shapes that seemed to reach out for me. I pressed myself against the door, trying to block out the torment, but the sounds seeped through, a relentless assault on my sanity. Desperation drove me to seek help. I reached out to a local paranormal investigator, hoping to shed light on the house's malevolent forces. Dr. Emily Hart, a seasoned expert in the supernatural, agreed to meet me the following day. Her presence brought a flicker of hope amidst the darkness that had consumed the house. When she arrived, Dr. Hart immediately sensed the malevolent energy. "This place is tainted," she declared, her eyes scanning the room with a mixture of fear and determination. "The spirits here are restless, angry, and desperate to communicate. We need to perform a cleansing ritual to appease them." Together, we set up the necessary equipment. Candles flickering in the dim light, Dr. Hart began the ritual, chanting ancient incantations that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of the house. The temperature fluctuated wildly, and the green substance began to writhe and move as if alive. Shadows twisted and turned, forming horrifying apparitions that wailed in anguish. As the ritual progressed, the house resisted, the spirits fighting against our attempts to bring peace. The voices grew louder, more desperate, until they converged into a single, heart-wrenching plea, "Save us!" With a final, forceful chant, Dr. Hart completed the ritual. A blinding light enveloped the room, and the oppressive presence lifted, replaced by an overwhelming sense of calm and relief. The green substance evaporated into thin air, and the shadows dissipated, leaving the house feeling lighter and more welcoming. Exhausted but hopeful, I thanked Dr. Hart for her help. "I can't believe we did it," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. She nodded solemnly. The spirits have found peace, but the house will always carry the scars of its dark past. It's essential to respect that history and honor the memories of those who suffered here. In the days that followed, the house settled into a quieter, more peaceful existence. The eerie phenomena ceased, replaced by a serene stillness that allowed me to finally feel at home. But the memory of those harrowing nights lingered, a constant reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the supernatural. Years have passed since I moved into the Amityville house, and while the shadows of the past no longer haunt me, the lessons learned remain etched in my mind. I've become an advocate for awareness and protection against the unseen forces that can infiltrate our lives, sharing my story to help others understand the delicate balance between the living and the dead. In the quiet moments, when the wind whispers through the trees and the house settles into its peaceful slumber, I reflect on the journey that brought me here. The Amityville house stands as a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, the capacity for resilience in the face of unimaginable horror, and the unbreakable bond between those who seek to bring light into the darkest of places. And so, as I continue to live in this haunted sanctuary, I carry with me the memories of the past and the hope for a future untainted by fear. The shadows may have once threatened to consume me, but with courage and compassion, I've learned to navigate the darkness and find solace in the light.